He was the most feared Alpha King in 7 centuries of recorded history, and his beast had never once knelt, not for his counsel, not for visiting kings, not for the woman who wore the Luna's crown and stood at his side through 3 years of court ceremony and political theatre. Hadrian's wolf did not kneel, until it did, until a girl with flour on her sleeve and blood on her palm stood in the candlelight of the great hall, and the beast inside him dropped to its belly like it had been waiting for her its entire life. This is the story of how that happened, and what it cost them both to survive it. Maren had learned early that the safest place in Ashenveil Castle was wherever no one was looking. The kitchens at dawn, the linen corridors before the lords woke, in the narrow passage behind the great hall's north wall that smelled of torch smoke and cold stone, and was never, ever used by anyone of rank. She was small, not delicate, not fragile, but the kind of small that people look past without thinking. Dark auburn hair that she kept braided tightly against her neck, copper red catching the firelight if she moved too close to a torch, which she made sure not to. Eyes the colour of still water before a storm, grey-green, hazel at the edges, uniquely expressive in a face she worked hard to keep neutral. Her hands told a different story than the rest of her. They were calloused and strong, mapped with small white scars from years of kitchen work and harder things before that. She kept them hidden inside her sleeves when she walked the corridors, fists loose at her sides, chin slightly down, and her face was striking when she was still. High cheekbones, a jaw that was perhaps too strong for the softness of her brow, lips that curved slightly even when she was not smiling. But she moved in a way that discouraged looking, and most people complied. In Ashenveil, a low-born girl kept her chin down. Maren had been contracted to the castle at 14, brought in by the northern steward as a debt settlement, part of a larger arrangement she had never been shown the documents for, and stopped asking about by the time she was 16. She cleaned, she carried, she served at table when they were short-staffed, and disappeared back into the walls when the meal was done. She was 22 now. She had learned to be very, very good at being forgotten. There were others like her in the castle, servants bound by debt or contract or simple circumstance, but Maren had long ago learned to keep her distance from even them. Closeness invited questions. Questions invited attention. Attention invited the exact kind of scrutiny that would eventually find what she had been hiding since she was 14 years old, and had understood for the first time that she was something the world would not easily forgive her for being. The selection was announced on a Tuesday, in the first hard frost of the season. Maren heard it from Petra, one of the older kitchen girls, who had heard it from a footman, who had been standing close enough to the council chamber door to catch the words through the crack. And the news moved through the servants' quarters faster than heat through stone, the way all important news did, carried in whispers and half-glances, arriving complete and slightly distorted by the time it reached the people who would be most affected by it. "They say his current Luna is barren," Petra whispered, her voice barely above the scrape of her knife on the chopping board. 3 years and no heir. They're dissolving the bond. Maren set down the water pitcher she was carrying. "They can do that? The Alpha King can do anything. Hadrian of House Drevane, Alpha King of the Ashen Lands, the Bloodmoor, and the 3 territories north of the Cairn Mountains, was not a man who permitted discussion of his private life. The council had learned this at some cost. The visiting lords had learned it faster. The woman who currently bore the title of Luna, Lady Seraphine Vale, was elegant and ruthless, and had been chosen for political reasons 3 years ago. She had never made the mistake of believing that Hadrian felt anything for her. She had not needed him to. The mate bond, as far as anyone could observe, had never activated for an Alpha King of Hadrian's line in 3 generations. It was quietly accepted at court that some wolves simply ran cold, and that power on the scale Hadrian wielded was its own form of completeness. The selection was to be held at the winter feast. All unmatched women of suitable rank were invited to present themselves. The Alpha King would identify his fated mate, if the bond existed, and the court would witness it. It was, Petra said, the most romantic thing to happen at Ashenveil in living memory. Maren thought it sounded like an execution with flowers. She did not plan to be anywhere near the great hall when it happened. She had a very clear plan. She would spend the evening of the winter feast moving linens from the east wing storage to the west corridor guest quarters, which had been allocated to visiting lords and required fresh bedding. It would take hours. It would keep her completely away from anything political. The plan lasted until Lady Seraphine's handmaid found her in the linen corridor at 6:30 and informed her, not asked, informed, that she was needed to carry serving trays for the feast, because 2 of the regular servers had taken ill and there simply was no one else. Maren was given an apron and a tray and told to stay against the wall and speak to no one. She almost made it to the great hall without incident. The corridor outside the east servants' entrance was narrow and candle-lit, and she had rounded the corner with her tray, empty still, collected from the kitchen, waiting to be loaded, when the man stepped out of the alcove and blocked her path. She knew him. Rendick, one of Lady Seraphine's personal guards, a heavy-set man with a broad jaw, who had made a practice of appearing in the wrong places at the wrong moments whenever Maren had cause to cross the east wing. He was not in his formal livery tonight. That detail registered before the rest of it. "Lady Seraphine has a message for you," Rendick said. Maren kept her face neutral. "Tell her I'm needed in the great hall. The message is this." He took the tray from her hands. Not asked. He simply taken, and set it against the wall, and then he took hold of her arm above the elbow, his grip closing hard enough to bruise, and walked her backward 3 steps until the stone wall of the corridor stopped her. "You'll serve tonight, and you'll keep your eyes on the floor. You will not look at the high table. You will not come within 6 feet of the dais. And if she asks you anything at all, your answer is yes, my lady." Maren's heart was hammering, but her voice was level. That's a very detailed message. She wanted to be clear. He held her there against the cold stone for 3 seconds. She counted, and then released her. He picked up the tray, set it back in her hands. "Eyes on the floor," he said, and walked away. Maren stood in the corridor for a moment, her arm aching where his fingers had been. The stone was cold at her back, and the sounds of the feast preparation filtered from the hall ahead. Music tuning, the clatter of serving ware, the low swell of arriving voices. She straightened, adjusted her grip on the tray. She was very good at surviving the things she was not allowed to speak about. She was very good at that last part. The great hall was blazing, every torch lit, every candelabra burning down to drips of beeswax against the stone. Long tables covered in white cloth and loaded with food. The visiting lords sat in their carved chairs. The women eligible for selection had been arranged on the south side of the room in gowns that cost more than Maren made in a year, and she could feel the particular quality of their attention, coiled, watchful, very carefully controlled. She noticed the way every eye in the room kept drifting toward the dais. She did not look at the dais. She moved with her tray and kept her chin down and did not think about the man sitting at the high table. She was aware of him the way you were aware of a fire in a room, peripherally, constantly, as a source of heat and potential danger. She had served 3 winter feasts at Ashenveil. She had learned where to position herself to be useful and invisible simultaneously, and she was doing exactly that now. It was Lady Seraphine who made the first mistake. Or perhaps it was not a mistake at all. Perhaps it was entirely calculated, which made it worse. Maren was moving along the edge of the high table with a tray of honeyed wine when Lady Seraphine turned from her conversation and stepped directly into her path. Not by accident. The angle was too precise for accident. Maren had no time to stop. The tray tilted. The wine went across both of them, mostly across Maren, dark and cold, and smelling of honey, and something underneath the honey that she would think about later. And then Lady Seraphine's voice cut through the sudden silence, like a blade through silk. "You stupid, careless girl." Every head at the high table turned. Lady Seraphine's face was perfectly arranged into fury. She was beautiful when she was furious. She was always beautiful, coldly so, golden hair and an arrangement of features that had been described in court poetry as architectural. And she knew exactly what that looked like, and used it deliberately. "Do you have any idea what this gown cost?" "I'm sorry, my lady." Don't speak." Seraphine's hand caught Maren's wrist as she tried to step back. Her grip was hard, fingers finding the bone with accuracy that suggested practice. "You'll stand there, and you'll account for this." She twisted. The pain was sharp and immediate. The edge of the serving tray caught the heel of Maren's palm, not by accident, by design, the angle of Seraphine's grip directing the edge precisely. And then there was the additional press of Seraphine's ring, the large amber stone set in silver on her right hand, grinding into the torn skin. The line of blood appeared across Maren's palm, bright, immediate, catching the candlelight in a way that made it visible from several feet away. Maren did not make a sound. She had long practice in not making sounds. But somewhere at the far end of the great hall, and something else did. Low, not quite a growl, and not quite silence. Something between them, something animal, something that made the torches seem to waver in their brackets, and the temperature in the room drop 3 degrees in 2 heartbeats. The sound a wolf makes when it has been very, very still for a very long time, and has just been given a reason to move. Lady Seraphine let go of Maren's wrist. Maren looked up. She had managed, all evening, not to look directly at the man seated at the head of the high table. Now she had no choice. Hadrian of House Drevane was standing. He was very large in the way that men born to certain kinds of power were sometimes large, not simply tall or broad, but dense with it, built like something the mountains had exhaled and the cold had hardened. Dark hair, close-cropped, a jaw that could have been carved from the same stone as the hall's pillars, a scar that ran from his left temple into his hairline, fine and silver-pale, the kind left by a blade rather than a claw, eyes that had been described in court gossip as amber, or gold, or the colour of a wolf's eyes when the firelight found them right. Right now, they were not amber. They were burning, bright and gold and feral in a way that had nothing to do with candlelight. They were locked on the cut across Maren's palm. The entire hall had gone silent. Hadrian moved, not walked, moved, in that way that senior pack members sometimes did when the beast was very close to the surface, too fast and too deliberate at once. The crowd parted ahead of him without being asked. Lady Seraphine stepped back without meaning to. He reached Maren in 8 steps, so crossing the length of the high table in the time it took the footman by the door to blink. He stopped in front of her. This close, he was overwhelming. That was the only word her mind could locate. The pressure of his presence was physical, actual pressure, like standing at the base of a waterfall, the air itself rearranging to account for him. He looked at her hand. Then he looked at her face. Something shifted in his expression. Cracked was the wrong word, but cracked was the one that arrived, like stone that had held a very long time and was only now admitting to a fault line that had been present all along. He went to one knee. The sound that went through the great hall was not a gasp. It was something too large to be a gasp, something closer to the sound a room makes when it understands that everything it thought it knew was wrong. The collective intake of breath of 400 witnesses watching the most feared man in 7 territories lower himself to the stone floor of his own hall before a girl in a wine-stained apron. His beast, the court would say afterward, had simply refused to stand upright in her presence. "Your hand," he said. His voice was quiet for a man whose voice usually carried the length of a corridor without effort. "Give me your hand." Maren stared at him. She could feel the blood from her palm dripping. She could feel every eye in the room. She could feel the weight of 8 years of invisibility suddenly, catastrophically ending. "I'm going to look at the cut," he said, slower, and with a patience that seemed to cost him nothing at all. "Give me your hand, Maren." She had not told him her name. She gave him her hand. He held it with a carefulness she could not explain, and would spend some time afterward trying to. His thumb traced the edge of the cut, not pressing, just mapping it, the way a man reads a document he wants to remember, and his eyes went from burning gold back to amber, slowly, the feral light bleeding out of them, as if simply looking at her was enough to settle something that had been unsettled for a long time. "Who did this to you?" he said. Not a question, a beginning. "It was an accident, my lord." Her voice was steady. She was profoundly proud of how steady it was. The tray slipped. He looked up at her. The amber was patient. She got the sense that he had all the time in the world, that he had lived inside patience, as other men lived inside ambition, and that he could wait inside it longer than she could hold her ground. "The tray slipped," she said again, quieter. He stood. He did not release her hand. "Clear the hall," he said to the room without raising his voice. They cleared the hall. This was the thing about power at a certain altitude. It did not require volume. No one argued. No one lingered. The visiting lords filed out with a speed that suggested they understood when they were being given a gift by being permitted to leave, and the eligible women followed, and Lady Seraphine stood for 3 additional seconds, Maren counted them, before the man beside her put a hand on her arm and she went too, the footman, the servers, Petra near the door, who gave Maren a look that communicated several things simultaneously, none of which were going to be of any use in the immediate situation. Then the hall was empty, and Maren was still holding the Alpha King's hand. He moved her to the private antechamber off the main hall. Stone walls, a fire in the grate, 2 chairs. He sat her in one of the chairs with the calm efficiency of someone who was very used to managing situations. Then he knelt again beside her chair, which was the second time in 10 minutes that Hadrian of House Drevane had gone to his knees, and looked at her palm in the firelight. "It needs cleaning," he said. "There's something—" He paused. His nostrils flared. "There's something else here. On the wound." Maren had not thought about that. She thought about it now. Lady Seraphine's ring, the amber stone in silver. The grinding press of it against the torn skin. "She sometimes treats her ring," Maren said carefully. "I don't know what it is." His jaw tightened. He called for his physician without moving from his position beside her chair, which meant he called loudly enough to be heard through the stone door, and his voice was very controlled in the way that voices sometimes got when the emotion behind them was very large and had decided to stay where it was. Oswin came, the castle physician, small and sharp-eyed, with 30 years of practice and the particular composure of a man who had been called to unusual situations in the middle of formal events before. He looked at Maren's palm. He sniffed at the wound with an economy that suggested he knew exactly what he was sniffing for. Then he looked at Hadrian. "Wolfsbane derivative," Oswin said. "It diluted, but yes, enough to suppress a shift for 3 to 5 days, longer at a higher dose. The temperature in the antechamber changed. The sound she could hear was Hadrian's breathing, controlled, deliberate, the meticulous management of something very large that very much wanted to stop being managed. She couldn't shift, he said. Not without considerable pain, Oswin confirmed, already working on Maren's hand. If our girl is a shifter. Maren opened her mouth. She is, Hadrian said. Maren closed her mouth. He was looking at her with amber patience. She had been hiding for 8 years. She had constructed her entire existence around the principle that discovery meant belonging to someone else in an official way, which was harder to survive than the unofficial arrangements she had learned to manage. She had shifted for the first time at 14 in a cold field outside her father's failing estate, and understood, with the crystalline clarity of a thing that cannot be undone, that her life had just changed in a way she could not predict. Her mother had died 2 years before that. There had been no one to ask what it meant, no one to explain what she was or what she owed to what she had become. She had simply learned to carry it quietly, like everything else. "How long?" Hadrian said. 8 years, she said. "I've been careful." He nodded once, slow, the nod of a man filing confirmed information. "What are you?" he asked. Not unkindly, precisely. She looked at the fire. "Maren." She looked at her bandaged hand, then at him. "My mother was Thornborn," she said. "The bloodline runs silver. I've never had anyone to ask what that means." Oswin went still. Hadrian went still. Thornborn. The silver bloodline. The oldest shifter lineage in the Ashen Lands, older than House Drevane, older than the Council's founding treaties, older than the documents that had carved up the north into its current territories. A bloodline so ancient that half the court believed it had died out entirely, and the other half had forgotten to care. "Your mother's name?" Hadrian said. "Elara of Thornwood," Maren said. "She died when I was 12. Something moved across his face that she didn't have a name for. Not grief, not surprise. Something more like recognition. The expression of a man who has just watched a very large piece of a puzzle. He didn't know he was solving click into a space he hadn't known was empty. He stood. So he walked to the fire. He stood with his back to her, one hand braced against the stone mantel, his shoulders very still. In the firelight, Maren could see things about him that the distance of the great hall had not permitted. The scar at his temple was older than it looked, faded to a silver thread, the kind of mark left by something that had healed many years ago. His hands were still. Not the performed stillness of a man trying to appear calm, but the deep natural stillness of something that did not move unless it had decided to move. She had spent 8 years reading people at a glance, had developed a particular precision in it, the survival skill of someone who needed to know which rooms were safe before she entered them, and she could not read Hadrian of House Drevane at all. That, she realized, was new. She was not certain whether it was frightening or interesting. She decided it was both. "What happens next?" she asked. "What happens next," he said, "is that I go back into that hall." He turned around. The amber in his eyes was cold and certain. "And I address several things. The council does not concern me at this moment." He moved to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. "You will stay here, with Oswin. You will not leave this room until I return. I'm not in the habit of following orders," she said. He turned then. Something shifted in his expression, a hairline fault in the stone. "You'll follow this one." He left. The sound that came from the great hall 12 minutes later was not subtle. She could hear the quality of his voice through the walls. Low, absolute, and the kind of authority that did not raise itself, because it had never needed to. And she could hear Lady Seraphine's voice rising against it, and then, very suddenly, stopping. Then silence. Then the sound of boots on stone, measured and deliberate, coming back. Hadrian returned, calmer than when he had left. There was blood on one knuckle. A small amount. Maren decided not to ask about the blood on his knuckle. "Seraphine Vale will be taken to the East Tower," he said, with the tone of a man reading from a document he has already written. "She will remain there while the council convenes. The wolfsbane on her ring will be examined by Oswin and 2 independent witnesses. The records of every servant she has had unsupervised access to over the past 3 years will be reviewed." He sat in the chair across from her, looked at her bandaged hand, "There's something I need to tell you," he said, "about why I went to my knee." Maren waited. "My wolf has never acknowledged an Alpha King's Luna," he said. "Not in 3 years of formal ceremony. Not with Seraphine, not before her. My council chose her for political reasons, and I permitted it because I had come to believe the fated mate bond was not something that applied to me." He was looking at his own hands now. "I was wrong," he said. The fire shifted. The stone walls held the warmth carefully, the way old things hold what they are given. Maren's heart was doing something complicated. She had spent 8 years perfecting invisibility. She had structured her entire life around the principle that being seen was the most dangerous thing she could allow. "I'm a contracted servant," she said. "A debt settlement from 8 years ago. I am not eligible for selection, my lord." "You are Thornborn," he said. "Ilara of Thornwood's daughter. Whatever contract was written over you was written by people who either did not know what you were or did not care to record it, and neither condition makes it binding in pack law." "The steward does not concern me?" He looked up. "You concern me. You have concerned me since the moment your blood reached me across the width of this hall and my beast tried to go through the wall to get to you." "That's the bond," she said. "That isn't a choice." "No," he said, "it isn't." He didn't argue with her, and he sat with the fact of it, with the weight of a thing that could not be forced, with the patience of a man who was very used to getting what he wanted through will, and had just encountered something that would not yield to will, and was, perhaps for the first time, willing to let that be. "I haven't agreed to anything," Maren said. "No," he said, "you haven't." The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was large and honest, and he made no effort to fill it. "I want to sleep," she said finally. "My hand hurts." The fault line opened a fraction wider. "Oswin will show you to a room," he said, "not the servants' wing." She stood. She stopped at the door. "The beast," she said. "When it knelt, what did that feel like?" He was quiet for a moment. The fire moved. The shadows in the antechamber shifted and settled. "Well, like coming home," he said. "After so long in a country where nothing was recognizable that you had stopped expecting to find your way back." Maren looked at the door handle. "I'll think about it," she said. She left. She thought about it for 3 days. In a room that had a real bed and a fire that someone else lit, and a window overlooking the castle's inner courtyard, she watched the frost come and go with the turning of the weather. And she thought. She thought about 8 years of becoming small. She thought about her mother, who had died without explaining what the silver in her blood meant. She thought about the Thornborn bloodline and what it implied about the life she had been living and the life she might have had. She thought about a man going to his knees in front of 400 witnesses in the great hall of his own castle, and holding her hand with a carefulness that had no strategy in it whatsoever. On the 3rd day, she left the room. She found Hadrian in the inner courtyard, alone, which she had been told by the physician was unusual. He stood in the snow without a cloak, the cold apparently making no impression on him, looking at something in the middle distance that she could not identify. His wolf was very close to the surface. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the absolute stillness that was not peace, but the careful management of something immense that wanted very badly to move. She walked out into the snow. It was cold. The courtyard stones were pale with frost, and her shoes were not made for weather. But she walked to the edge of the space between them. She could feel it now in a way she hadn't 3 days ago, the boundary of the bond, like warmth, like the threshold of a room with a fire inside it. And she stopped. She held out her hand, bandaged, calloused, small inside the white cloth that Oswin had changed twice. The wolf came forward, not as a beast, as the thing behind the man's eyes, the ancient recognition in them, the part of Hadrian of House Drevane that did not have words and did not need them. He looked at her hand, and then at her face, and then he crossed the space between them, and took her hand in both of his, wrapping the cold of her fingers in warmth without speaking, just holding it. The snow fell around them. The castle was quiet. "I've decided," she said. He waited. "I'm not doing this because of the bond," she said. "I'm doing this because you held my hand like it was worth holding, because you emptied a hall full of lords and politics so I could breathe, because when I lied to you about the tray, you didn't call me a liar. You just waited. Those are small things," he said. "They are everything," she said, "to someone who has spent 8 years being invisible." He looked at her in the snow, not at the Luna, not at the Thornborn lineage or the political weight of what she represented to his council and his court. At her, at the woman who had spent 8 years learning to take up no space and was now standing in his courtyard in inadequate shoes, taking up exactly the space she was owed. "I don't know how to be what you need," he said. The words cost him something. She could see the cost in the line of his jaw. "You already started," she said. 3 days ago, in the hall." The beast had been patient for 3 days. She understood it now, could feel the edges of the bond clearly enough to understand that patience like that, the deep, unhurried waiting of something that simply knew, was not a small thing for what lived inside him. She felt it settle now, like something enormous lying down in the snow beside her, like a wolf that had run a very long hunt and had finally stopped. The council would meet in 4 days. She would be required to attend. Hadrian had said so, with the tone of a man who was learning, slowly, the difference between requiring and requesting, and was trying to calibrate the distance between them. She would stand before men who had never seen her except as part of the hall's furniture, and be addressed as Thornborn, and watch the political weight of her bloodline arrive in the room ahead of her, like a different person entirely. She was not afraid of that. She had expected to be, and she wasn't. What she was, unexpectedly, with a warmth that felt slightly unfamiliar in her chest, like a room she hadn't been in for years, was curious. She wanted to see what happened next. That felt, after 8 years of simply enduring what happened, like something worth noticing. Her hand was warm in his. The snow kept falling. She did not go back to the servants' wing.